There's a place in Rio Grande do Sul where the river has been keeping secrets for over 200 years. A place where the current whispers stories of freedom, betrayal, and a treasure that was never found. This place exists, and what I'm about to tell you today isn't just a legend. It's a historical fact that became the greatest mystery in the Guaíba region. It was a new moon night in 1781. The kind of night where the darkness is so thick you can't see your own hand in front of your face. That night, something happened that would forever change the course of local history. Something that would trigger manhunts, deaths, and a mystery that persists to this day. Picture this: a group of men running through the dense forest of colonial Rio Grande do Sul. The sound of branches breaking under their feet, heavy breathing, fear, but also hope. These men were carrying something heavy, something valuable, something that didn't belong to them, or did it? These were fugitive slaves. But they weren't ordinary slaves. They had just committed what the authorities considered the boldest crime ever recorded in the region. They had stolen a treasure, not just any treasure, the Count's treasure. You must be wondering, what treasure was this? Where did it come from? Why was it there? And more importantly, where is it now? The story I'm telling you today involves unimaginable riches, a desperate escape, and a punitive expedition that ended in total failure. A secret buried on the banks of a stream that still attracts treasure hunters from all over the country. The Count's Stream, a name that evokes mystery. A place where the water runs slow and dark, as if deliberately guarding the secrets of the past. Local people say that on certain nights, when the wind blows from a particular direction, you can still hear strange sounds coming from the banks. Hurried footsteps, distant voices, the clinking of gold coins. Are these just stories, legends told to scare children? Or is there really something buried there, waiting to be discovered for nearly 2.5 centuries? What makes this story even more fascinating is that it didn't spring from popular imagination. No, it's documented, recorded in official chronicles of the time. There's a report from a punitive expedition sent to capture the fugitives, a report that publicly admits the mission's total failure. Think about that for a moment. To fully understand this story, we first need to go back in time and comprehend what life was like in Rio Grande do Sul in 1781. Brazil was a Portuguese colony. The southern region was considered strategic, bordering Spanish domains. It was a land of conflicts, territorial disputes, but also of opportunities. Vast stretches of land were granted to nobles and wealthy farmers who established huge properties dedicated mainly to cattle raising and agriculture. On these farms, the work was done by slaves brought from Africa, men and women torn from their lands, from their families, from their lives, and forced to work in inhumane conditions in a distant and hostile land. But the human spirit is hard to break, and even under the chains of slavery, there were those who dreamed of freedom, those who planned, those who waited for the right opportunity. It was in this context that our story begins. There was a large rural property near what we know today as Guaíba, a prosperous farm with vast plantations and hundreds of head of cattle. The owner was a wealthy man connected to Portuguese nobility. Some say he had connections to a count, hence the name Count's Stream. Others claim he himself was the count. The truth was lost to time. What we know for certain is that this man possessed considerable fortune, and not just in land and cattle. He kept at his farm a treasure in gold and precious stones. Why did he keep such wealth in such a remote location? There are several theories. Some historians suggest it was money intended for paying troops. Others believe it was resources to finance commercial operations with Jesuit missions. There are still those who say it was simply the owner's personal fortune. Whatever the truth, the fact is that this treasure existed, and it wasn't a secret to anyone on the farm, much less to the slaves who worked there. Among these slaves, there was one man. The chronicles didn't record his real name, but let's call him John, as was common at the time. John wasn't an ordinary slave. He had been captured in Africa as an adult, which meant he still carried vivid memories of freedom. He remembered what it was like to be free. John was intelligent, observant, and had a natural gift for leadership. Over time, he gained the trust of other slaves on the farm. He encouraged them, kept their hopes alive, and planned. For months, perhaps years, John observed every detail of the farm. He learned the guards' patrol schedules, identified the weak points in security, mentally mapped all possible escape routes, and discovered exactly where the treasure was kept. But John knew that freedom wasn't enough. They needed resources, money to restart their lives, to travel far away, to perhaps one day buy the freedom of others. The treasure wasn't just wealth, it was materialized hope. The opportunity finally came on an October night in 1781. The farm's master had left for Porto Alegre, taking with him most of his henchmen. Only a few guards and the overseer remained. John knew it was now or never. He had gathered a group of 6 trusted men, strong men, brave, desperate for freedom, men who were willing to risk everything for a chance to escape that hell. The plan was simple, but risky. They would take advantage of the new moon's darkness to act. First, they would neutralize the overseer silently. Then, they would access the location where the treasure was kept. And finally, they would flee through the forest until reaching the stream, where they could follow the current and throw off any pursuit. When night fell completely, dark as pitch, John gave the signal. The events that followed were quick and precise. The group moved like shadows through the farm. The overseer, drunk as usual, was easily overpowered and tied up. The guards, inattentive, noticed nothing until it was too late. John and his companions broke through the heavy wooden door of the warehouse where the treasure was kept. And there, in the dim light of a single candle, they saw chests full of gold coins, silver bars, precious stones. It was more wealth than any of them had ever seen in their entire lives. There was no time for admiration. Working quickly, they transferred as much as they could carry into burlap sacks. The weight was immense, but the adrenaline of escape gave them superhuman strength. And then, they disappeared into the night. They ran through the dense forest, guided by memory and the distant sound of water. Branches whipped their faces. Roots tried to trip them. The weight of the treasure made every step torture, but they continued. Behind them, shouts began to ring out at the farm. Someone had discovered the theft. Torches began to light up. Dogs began to bark. The chase had begun. John and his group finally reached the stream's banks. The dark water reflected the starlight. The sound of the current promised freedom, if they could take advantage of it. But they could hear the pursuers approaching. The dogs were on their trail. There wasn't much time. It was then that John made a decision that would change everything. "We need to bury the treasure," he told the others. "It's slowing us down. We'll mark it here and come back when we're safe." Some protested. After all the risk, simply leave the treasure behind? But John was the leader, and his logic was irrefutable. With the weight of the gold, they would never escape the dogs and horses. Without it, they had a chance. Working frantically, they dug on the stream's banks. The location had distinctive features: an old tree with twisted branches, a peculiar rock formation, the specific curve of the river. They memorized every detail. They buried the sacks with the treasure and carefully covered the spot. They used leaves and branches to disguise any sign of disturbed earth. The work took precious minutes. When they finished, the pursuers' torches were already visible among the trees. The group split up. It was a survival tactic. Separated, at least some could escape. Each man went in a different direction, always following the river, but keeping enough distance from the banks to not be easily spotted. John went upstream, moving as silently as he could. Behind him, he heard shouts, barking, the chaos of the search. But he was skilled. He knew tricks to throw off dogs. He used the river to wash away his scent. He moved through rocky areas that left no footprints. Meanwhile, the pursuers, led by the furious overseer and farm henchmen, desperately searched the area. They knew the fugitives were nearby. They knew they had the treasure. But the darkness of the night and the vastness of the forest worked against them. When dawn finally came, something extraordinary had happened. None of the fugitives had been captured. They had all simply disappeared, and with them, the treasure. News of the theft spread quickly through the region. A group of slaves had stolen a fortune and escaped. It was unthinkable. It was dangerous. If other slaves heard this story and were inspired to do the same, the entire structure of the colonial system could be threatened. The authorities had no choice. They needed to act decisively. An official punitive expedition was organized. It wasn't just a group of local henchmen, it was a proper military operation with experienced soldiers, professional trackers. The official documents of this expedition survive to this day. They're part of the region's historical archives and are indisputable proof that these events really happened. It's not legend, it's history. The expedition departed with great pomp and confidence. They had the best men, the best dogs, the best resources. They expected to solve the case in a few days. Weeks passed. The soldiers searched the entire area around the stream. They questioned people on neighboring farms. They followed false leads. They explored every inch of the forest. They found signs of the fugitives, abandoned camps, tracks that led nowhere. But the men themselves? Never. And the treasure? Not a sign. It was as if the group had been swallowed by the earth or by the water. The expedition commander became obsessed. He was being ridiculed. How could a group of fugitive slaves carrying enormous weight simply disappear? How could his group of trained professionals not find them? He returned to the stream several times. Some instinct told him the answer was there, that the treasure was somewhere near those dark waters. But no matter how much he searched, he found nothing. The expedition stretched on for months. The financial cost was enormous, the frustration even greater. Finally, defeated and humiliated, the soldiers returned. The official report is fascinating in its brutal honesty. It admits complete failure. It acknowledges that the fugitives simply disappeared and that the treasure was never recovered. This document exists. You can see it in the historical archives. It's an official admission that the legend has roots firmly planted in reality. But what happened to John and his companions? And where is the treasure? Over the years, fragments of information emerged. Stories passed from generation to generation in Quilombola communities in the region. Travelers' whispers, small pieces of an immense puzzle. Some say that John and at least two of his companions managed to reach what is today the Porto Alegre region, that they integrated into communities of free blacks, living discreetly with false identities. Others tell that the group planned to meet again after a few years, when the search cooled down, to recover the treasure. But that something went wrong, that some died, that others were recaptured, that the meeting never happened. There are even darker stories, of betrayals within the group, of disputes over the treasure that ended in violence, of deaths on the banks of the stream itself. The truth? We'll probably never know for sure. What we know is that the treasure was never officially recovered. No subsequent report mentions its discovery. No official inventory records its return. Does this mean it's still there? Buried somewhere on the banks of the Count's stream? Many believe so, and for nearly 250 years people have been searching. The story of the Count's stream treasure became a fundamental part of local culture. Generations grew up hearing about the buried gold, about the brave slaves who defied the system, about the mystery that was never solved. In 1933, writer Afonso Aurelio Porto published his novel The Legend of the Count's Stream Treasure. The work dramatized the events, added fictional elements, but kept the historical core intact. The book was a success and introduced the story to an even larger audience. Festivals were created in honor of the legend. Works of art were inspired by it. Songs were composed. The story became an inseparable part of the identity of Guaíba and Eldorado do Sul. But beyond cultural importance, the physical search for the treasure never ceased. Over the decades, countless people searched the banks of the Count's stream. Some were adventurers, others serious historians. There were also dreamers, those who saw in the lost treasure a chance to change their lives. Modern metal detectors were used, excavations were carried out, every stone was turned, every inch of bank was investigated. Some intriguing discoveries were made. Old coins were occasionally found, metal objects from the colonial period. Each find fueled the hope that the main treasure was nearby. But the big find, the chests full of gold and precious stones, remains elusive. Why is it so hard to find? There are several possible explanations. First, the river changed over the centuries. Floods, erosion, natural changes in the water's course may have completely altered the landscape. What was a bank in 1781 may now be under meters of water or sediment. Second, the visual references that John and his companions used to mark the location disappeared long ago. The old tree died and rotted. The rocks were moved or covered. The very shape of the river's curve changed. Third, perhaps the treasure was secretly recovered by someone at some point in the last 250 years, and the discovery was never disclosed. After all, whoever found such fortune might not want to share the news, whether out of fear of authorities, taxes, or simply greed. And there's a fourth possibility, the most romantic of all. John or one of his companions managed to return years later and recovered the treasure, used it to live in freedom, to help other slaves, to build a new life, and never told anyone, taking the secret to the grave. Regardless of where the gold is today, the real treasure of this story is its meaning. This is a story about resistance, about people who refused to accept slavery as their final destiny, who planned, risked everything, and conquered their freedom against all odds. It's a story about courage. Imagine what John and his companions felt that night. The fear of capture, torture, death, and yet they moved forward. It's also a story about intelligence and strategy. It wasn't brute force that ensured the escape's success, but careful planning, knowledge of the terrain, and teamwork. And it's a story about hope. The hope kept alive during years of captivity. The hope that propelled those men through the dark night. The hope that there is always a possibility of freedom. Today, when you visit the Count Stream region, you can feel the weight of history. The water still flows, dark and mysterious. The trees whisper in the wind. And you can't help but imagine, could I be stepping exactly where John stepped on that fateful night? The stream guards its secrets well. Perhaps the treasure is still there, waiting patiently beneath the earth. Perhaps it was taken long ago, or perhaps it will never be found, remaining forever as a symbol of something greater than material wealth. The legend lives on. New generations grow up hearing about the lost treasure. Some still search. Others simply appreciate the story for what it represents. Some say that on silent nights, when you're alone on the stream's banks, you can hear echoes of the past. Footsteps running through the forest, voices whispering in African languages, the sound of shovels digging earth. Are these just stories? Tricks of the imagination? Or could it be that some events leave marks so deep in reality that they echo through the centuries? The legend of the Count's Stream treasure is more than a story about lost gold. It's a fundamental chapter in Rio Grande do Sul's history. It's a testament to Black resistance against slavery. It's a demonstration that even in the darkest moments of human history, there are always those who fight for freedom. The fact that the story has documented historical roots makes everything even more powerful. We're not talking about an invented fable. We're talking about real events, real people, a real escape that left colonial authorities perplexed and humiliated. John existed, his companions existed, the treasure existed, and somewhere, somehow, this story continues. Perhaps you, watching this video now, feel inspired to visit the Count's Stream, to walk along its banks, to imagine that night of 1781. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the person who finally solves the mystery. Or perhaps you'll understand that the real treasure was found long ago, not in gold or precious stones, but in freedom, in the courage of John and his companions, in the story that inspired generations, in the legacy that remains alive today. The Count's Stream continues to flow as it always has. Its dark waters carry more than just water. They carry history. They carry memory. They carry the whispers of men who refused to remain slaves. And somewhere, perhaps buried under meters of earth and time, perhaps lost forever, perhaps waiting patiently to be discovered, the treasure is still there,